Hello and welcome to another Zepto Connect virtual fireside chat. I'm Trev. I'm one of Zepto's founders and your host today. Thanks so much for joining and what should be another terrific session. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on here in northern New South Wales, the Bundjalung people, and recognize their ongoing connections to the lands, waters, skies, and communities of this region. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to the traditional owners of the lands you're all joining from today. Now, before I introduce our esteemed guests today, a bit of housekeeping. So Zepto Connect events are best when there's audience engagement and participation. We're all human. We'd love to hear from you today. You'll be, at least I think we're all human. You will see some icons towards the top of your screen. There's a chat box represented by speech icons. You can post general comments and praise for the lovely speakers here. Below that is the Q&A icon where you can post questions you'd like me to ask the panel. We'll be monitoring the feed during the session, and we'll get to as many as we can. Bit of a pro tip, if you think someone has asked a great question that you'd like answered, you can upvote it by clicking the up arrow icon beneath the specific question. And finally, please start populating that with your questions, but remember, for best results, please keep questions in the Q&A channel and comment shout outs and emojis in the chat channel. And that way, all our busy bees working behind the scene will be able to curate them appropriately. So without further ado, it's time to meet our guests. So not all APIs are created equal, and this is the Zepto Connect session, a powerhouse panel. We'll discuss what makes an API great and the role APIs play in creating game-changing payment experiences for businesses and their customers alike. I was myself personally, part of the founding crew that built our Zepto API. I have a technical background. I'm a full-blown nerd technical geek. I'll try to keep this at a nice, even level, but if we start diving a little bit deep here and there, please forgive me. I'm excited to host this conversation as I love to dive a bit deeper into things and understand what makes different technologies tick. So, time to meet our guests. So, we're joined today by Gary Kemper, Head of Commercial APAC at Gravy. Gary worked in leadership roles across various industries, including SaaS, banking payments, e-commerce, and fraud prevention. In his current role, he's responsible for driving the growth and expansion of Gravy's cloud-based infrastructure as a service payment platform. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Likewise. We also have on our panel today, Steph Sheriff, VP of Engineering at Spaceship, one of Zepto's valued customers. Stephanie has over 20 years of software development experience, and her team at Spaceship use Zepto's solution to power a range of payment flows in their investment app, including PayID, NPP payouts, and soon Pay2. Welcome, Steph.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And last, but finally not least, our one and only Justin, who's our Zepto Head of Solution. Justin has an enviable depth of experience at PayPal, Braintree, Go Cardless, and now Zepto. He's about as experienced as they come in the Australian payment ecosystem, and we're glad to have him join us here today as well. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Jeff. Cheers.
All right. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into the conversation. And I've got some icebreaker questions here, but before we get on to the icebreaker questions, I put together a couple of words in order to just firstly make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about an API. So one of the I like mental models, and one of the mental models that's worked well for me is when thinking about an API. By the way, stands for Application Programming Interface, is a form. When you fill out a form, whether you're doing it on paper or filling it out online, and you're expecting to get a response off the back of that form, is essentially the same thing when it comes to an API. It's just usually between two devices, two computers, etc. So that's a simplistic explanation of an API. You ask something, you get a response. And thinking about more opening up the mind a little bit, When we think about an API, once implemented, it's used by 2 or more machines to communicate. But ultimately, a great API is one that enables human creativity and potential to efficiently and securely automate and integrate multidisciplinary functions into a cohesive solution. So I told you I glued a few words together, but ultimately, I think that's the really important part. And I was talking just previously with Gary on this, and he's an avid surfer himself, Gary. And he said, hey, have you ever seen what Surfline's done with surf sessions? And for those of you who may not be familiar with Surfline, it's basically, it's got cameras on popular surf breaks around the world. And they recently deployed a product called Surf Sessions, Gary?
Yeah.
And if you have a smartwatch and you have the app on it, whilst you're surfing, if you're surfing in front of a surf break with the camera, it tracks your velocity when you've caught a wave and takes clips of your surfing. So then when you get back home, you can see all the waves that you did or did not make, and criticize yourself and share it with friends. But that's all connected together using a bunch of different APIs. I thought that was, really came back to, around you can grab all these APIs and really take your human creativity and ideas to the next level. So in order, I spoke a lot about the API and humanity and creativity. So let's get to know the people that are here, and let's get started. What I'd like to ask each speaker is, first question being, what's one thing that really grinds your gears? And what's one thing that really makes you happy? So I'll start with Steph.
Okay, grinds gears, icebreaker questions. No, I'm just joking.
That's a great question, great answer though.
I'm going for a non-technical thing here, but the invalid use of your, there, and there.
Yes.
And my reasoning is because I am horrible at grammar and I can't spell, and yet I can get that right. So yeah, so not a technical one with that. What makes me happy? Chocolate. But I'm gonna have a geeky one here, kind of. But I actually, like, when we have, a problem with the team at work, and we kind of all jump on a call and get together and solve it and like come to the solution, I think, I don't know, I just love it. It's just a moment, it's work, but you're working with people you like to work with and solving problems, and I think that just is a really happy feeling and very rewarding. So
Love that, Steph. Love it.
mine.
I might pass over to you then, Gary.
What really grinds my gears is waiting in an inefficient digital or physical queue. I hate waiting in queues of any type, and when they're inefficient and one's moving quicker than the other and you're not in it, that drives me mental. And
I don't think you're alone there, Gary.
And on the flip side, I love it when merchants exceed your expectations. You go in there with reasonable hopes, and then they just over deliver what your expectations are. And it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, you go, someone's thinking about the customer here. This is fantastic. So on the flip side, that's what I really enjoy.
Love it. Thanks, Gary. Over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Trev. Quite topical to your example of the Surfline watch scenario, but I went for a run this morning and my watch battery ran out. So I don't know how far in, but it's probably around halfway. As with anyone who tracks their runs, they probably know that it doesn't count if it wasn't recorded on the Garmin. So that is incredibly frustrating. In terms of what makes me happy, I guess I've been lucky enough to work from home pre-COVID, probably the last 5 or 6 years. My wife and kids are around somewhere, probably listening in. So I should say that they make me happy more than anything else. From a more technical lens, I think just when things work, and we don't need to look at scoping workarounds or more complex ways to solve what should be a seemingly simple problem.
Love it. Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Steph. All right. So let's talk APIs, and in particular, let's talk about the technical aspects and what makes an API unique. So, firstly, Gary, I'd love to hear from your perspective and from Gravy. Does the API itself come into consideration when you're having commercial conversations with customers and prospects? It would be great to hear what people care about early on in the consideration process.
100%, it's coming up earlier and quicker in the discussion with all prospects now. They want to know about the APIs, they want to know about the advantages that they can get, and it is certainly included. Access of data, reducing the complexity, able to extend the functionality, and also, of course, the security aspect that's involved in that. So it is a very top of mind thing that's mostly discussed with commercial discussions.
Excellent. Thank you. And Steph, you might have a different perspective. As I understand it, Spaceship is currently exclusively a consumer of API. So you rely on various APIs to operate your business and provide a great service. What do you think are the characteristics of a great API?
Yeah, I mean, ease of use, that it's intuitive, I think is a big one. Security is always really important. But then I'd say probably good documentation examples, case studies of like how it should be used, and strong support, I think is a big one. The ability to get support from the vendor. Some other bits that are really important to us is the flexibility in it, the ability to get the data we need for our not just to get the regular events, but also like reconciliation type things to be able to search by different date values and that sort of thing. And then I think final to that is it's nice. I guess webhooks aren't exactly APIs, sort of like an associated thing, but like so that you don't have to always pull for information necessarily if there are updates related to calls to APIs, having webhooks that are also secure, obviously, so that you don't have to pull for data, which can be kind of annoying.
Yeah, I can understand that. And it's quite interesting. I'm gonna try not to digress too much on one side, but really there's an entire discussion to be had around webhooks versus actually polling specific kind of event endpoints so that you can kind of cater more to your application. But maybe if we have time, we can chat about that a little bit later. Justin, as our head of solutions, you're working with our Zepto API daily, helping our customers build payment flows and go live. When it comes to payments APIs, more specifically, what makes an API unique? How important is performance and scalability?
Good question. I probably spend far too much time thinking about this, so feel free to cut me off if I'm rambling. But I think like when it comes to payments APIs, there's a bunch of different areas you could probably call out as making that API or overall service unique. Like the real obvious ones are where APIs go beyond basic payment processing, so the actual payment or processing of a transaction, and start to offer additional features and functionality, things like fraud detection and prevention, recurring billing management, chargeback and dispute handling, streamlined back-end reconciliation processes, right through to things like real-time transaction monitoring. So these like value-added services obviously surfaced via an API, work really well in reducing a lot of manual processes, which a number of businesses obviously tend to struggle with. And like at the end of the day, improve the overall payments experience for both businesses and payer customers. Probably one of the other major pieces to call out, and again, it's quite obvious, but generally data security and general security protocols. So it's specific to the cards world, the business and the PSP or payment service provider need to ensure they're compliant to things like PCI DSS. However, I think like generally for any payments API, there needs to be that emphasis on prioritizing the latest and most effective forms of tokenization, encryption, etc., to ensure that people's sensitive payment information is kept secure. Performance and scalability, that was the question. I guess on the performance side, two key pieces. So I'd say, like, again, low latency. So any great payments API ensures a low latency, minimizing the time that it takes to process a transaction, resulting in a seamless experience, for anyone who's sitting online, reducing card abandonment rates in those e-com, retail, online or phone-based sort of payment scenarios, and increasing or maintaining overall conversion rates. And then high availability. So it gets repeated quite often, but payments never sleep. So a reliable payments API needs to be available 24/7, no downtime, ensuring that any business connecting to that API is able to process their payments without any interruption. Finally, scalability. So handling high transaction volumes, again, quite an obvious one. Handling consistent volumes that are expected from large customers pushing through regular transaction traffic, but probably more critically, those sudden surges in transaction volumes without compromising performance or stability. So essential for businesses during those peak seasons or for promotional events, the Black Fridays, Prime Days, Uber on New Year's Eve, for example, where huge amounts of traffic are being pushed through that API service. And then, just future growth, so being able to quickly and efficiently scale to accommodate the growth in performance or expected volumes of businesses who are connecting through to a payments API.
So what we're saying in short is you want it to be quick and to be consistently quick and be secure while it's doing it. And that's, if we can get those, and we're looking pretty good. But talking about security, so one of the things that's come up a fair bit recently, talking to, different businesses, and I'd like to hear from all of you, bit of a left of field question that's come up listening to Justin, is around security. So sometimes you integrate with an API and the security, getting a token, for example, and using your standard TLS or SSL certificates is pretty straightforward. But sometimes you start looking at mutual TLS, more encryption in transit, et cetera. Have you found that? First, the question for you, Justin: have you found that different customers have different security requirements, and do they vary wildly, or do they all seem to gravitate around the same kind of solutions?
It's a tough question to answer. I think the answer is yes, it is fairly consistent, but it also depends on the type of organization that you're talking to. So if you talk to anyone definitely within the payments industry or financial services industry specifically, then security and things like MPLS, as you mentioned, are front of mind. But when it comes to speaking to, I guess, organizations that don't necessarily have a head of payments or anyone who's intimately aware of the risk of not employing certain security measures, then it becomes less common. But I guess from a high level, it is definitely becoming more and more commonplace to start to have those conversations on a regular basis, and they start to come up earlier in conversations as opposed to right at the end where a contract needs to be signed, but you're still struggling to work through the requirements that a business may have that weren't surfaced in the first place. And whether it's a tick box exercise or an actually involved process, it's another question. But to answer your question, definitely becoming a topic of conversation very early on.
Yeah, fair enough. And Steph, from Spaceship's perspective, when you interact with APIs, do you and the team typically have a minimum standard, and then you look to uplift that via if it's not there and you're really keen on a particular API, work with them? Or what's typically the approach from your team?
Sometimes we just have to do that because we don't always have a choice where we can say, okay, no, we can't work with that, because they might provide a service to the business that's required. And as far as that service they provide outside of the API, it's like the best. So then we have to work with them with their API to make sure it kind of fits our own sort of cybersecurity requirements. I mean, mainly like in my point of view, it's just whether they're using like up-to-date, more modern, non-deprecated versions of things, really. That's the most important thing. So I think most of the time people are. So but yeah, that's the number one. And yeah, so it's just working with them to make sure that those standards are upgraded and it meets our cybersecurity docs.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? You need that strict standard that you adhere to as high as you possibly can, anyways. And Gary, my understanding, with Gravy, you obviously integrate with tons of different payment methods, and there's a lot of different standards. And Justin mentioned PCI DSS, for example, that relates specifically, or it's a credit card based standard. When at Gravy, is it a similar approach where it's based on the payment method when you're looking at the security requirements?
Pretty much every transaction data field we see is on the PII, so it's private. We see the credit card in the clear. We see the payment information. We see that a lot of very personal data. So PCI compliance and security is critical. And the smaller merchants just want to know that we've got it. When they know that we've got that compliance, they tick the box. The larger merchants go, it's more than a tick the box. We need to dig in deeper and see what that really means. So it is a core component of our business to ensure that we have that appropriate security levels.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. As far as I understand, Gravy also works with WPay, one of Australia's largest processors of payments. And as Justin mentioned, from your experience of working with them, how important is the tech API performance for them when they're considering payment partners?
Oh, holy mackerel. It is critical to them. If something goes wrong with a partner of Woolworths affecting a customer, it's not the partner that takes the punishment, it's Woolworths. If a payment declines or hangs, the consumer will go to social media and broadstream media to retaliate over the poor performance. WPay cannot afford to have any tech or API failure. It's too critical to their business, and they take the weight and the brunt of any failures that happen. So in answering your question, yes, it is important to them.
So I understood, Gary, and I think we've all seen it happen firsthand. Steph, you're on the customer side, as we kind of established, and in a technical role. We spoke about security a little bit. We spoke a bit about performance, and you mentioned that you have to be somewhat flexible with the APIs that you're integrating with. But what are some of the the key factors that your team assesses when looking for potential partners to utilize?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, we don't always, we can't always be the final say and going, oh, well, their API doesn't look great. You're not allowed to sign with them. Sometimes we just have to make it work. But like for us, if we are giving our say on it, definitely look, first off, is it just a modern API? I think that's a first kind of sign, because if it's a modern API, I think we've found it's more likely to tick the rest of the boxes. It doesn't necessarily mean it's so, but if it's just a modern REST API with good documentation, I think that's a good sign. The ability to read the docs and get out 95% of what we need is a good sign as well. Not just receiving the docs as a PDF in an email. That's never a good sign. But yeah, then just like, does it make sense? Can we look at them and go, well, we can kind of see just by, it's very intuitive. We can see what we're going to have to do. Obviously, you have to dig into it. The other thing, like, yeah, the docs, it's nice to know what the support channels are. That's kind of important to us, you know, that there's a decent ticketing system, but also often having, you know, a shared Slack channel is really nice to have, because maybe you do need to submit tickets, but the ability to sort of message out to someone, you know, especially in the beginning stages when you're setting up, is really good to have. So that communication channel, because if you don't have that, then it's like, depending on where they are, like the turnaround time, if you have a question, can be, you know, significant. Yeah, and like I said, like reconciliation ability, so that we know that what we have locally definitely matches what's on the other side. I think that's a huge one for us.
I love that thought around, you know, a shared Slack channel or some sort of kind of more instant communication channels, especially in the early stages, keeping that feedback loop really tight. Especially coming from an engineering perspective, you can be, you know, in there writing code, trying things, and then you ask a question and you have to wait a day to find out to get an answer to your question. That puzzle that you assembled in your mind essentially just gets put back in the box, and you have to reassemble it the next day. So when it comes to efficiency, that I felt that firsthand as well. When we were building the Zepto API, our mission, and it goes in line with what you're saying, Steph, if you're still with us. We still got you there, Steph? Oh, maybe not. I'll continue anyways. Steph, if you hear us at some stage, you also muted. But we really wanted to build at Zepto an API that would be enjoyable to consume for engineers themselves, right? So really targeting engineers, so that when they looked at the API, it was restful in the way that Steph was describing, and hopefully oh, there it is. She's back. Hey, Steph.
Sorry, lost internet.
No problem. Perfect timing as usual. But we really wanted an API that you would enjoy integrating with, that followed standards and actually like reasonable standards as well. And as Steph mentioned, there's your API references, and then you've got your documentation, where the documentation is just a nice supplement to the actual API references. But when you look at the API references, it has endpoints that make sense to you based on what you want to do. Like, I want to send a payment, receive a payment, reconcile X or Z, like that there's an endpoint named adequately. And you only have to go back to the docs if you want extra information. And for the non-technical folks amongst us, this might sound a bit odd, but when you're dealing with Tech Daily, it matters. So, Steph, again, welcome back. As an engineer yourself, which APIs in particular do you think have done a great job that you've worked with, that you've integrated with, or even just seen the docs and wow, that looks good. That looks like it would be a joy to work with, and my team could be efficient, and we could end up with a fantastic result.
Yeah, I think a good one that I haven't actually worked with, but just it comes up often in, you know, articles and online talk about APIs, is the Stripe one. Like, there's quite a lot of stuff there, and it's quite consistent and nice and good docs. So I haven't really done it myself, but that one seems to always come up as good examples if you're looking at one. Another one we've done very, very little with, just with like internal tooling, is like the GitHub API. But like I said, not much with that. But then others, Twilio was really good to integrate with. They had good documentation, lots of good examples, references to blog posts about best practices, all that sort of thing. Yeah, their admin panel kind of leaves a lot to be desired, but that's a whole other discussion. And then Zepto, of course. You
Oh, well,
guys
thanks.
have been
Thanks for
great,
that,
great
Steph.
to work with. Not just blowing smoke. That's honest assessment.
You mentioned Stripe, right? And when Stripe's always been one of those businesses that at Zepto we've also recognized do things quite well. And from some of my readings previously around the inception of Stripe, for example, like one of their first and only personas was the engineer, right? Like they wanted to make like payments accessible and easy to integrate with, and their target persona was the engineer. So it makes a lot of sense that you might mention Stripe and, for example, GitHub, for engineers by engineers, and really unlocking that creativity. Justin, you've worked with a few payment APIs in your career at Braintree, PayPal, GoCardless, and now Zepto. Beyond standard functionality, what have been some of the standout features of the APIs you've worked with? We've heard from a few that good documentation is key, but on top of that, like what actually makes documentation good?
Is that two questions in that?
Yeah, I kind of jammed two in one there, Justin, just keeping you on your toes.
Cool. I know you mentioned beyond standard functionality. I think like one of the standouts across all the organizations you just called out there is the ability for their APIs to streamline payment flows and do the standard stuff really, really well. So sometimes it's those like little things that can make a big difference, and sort of back to the performance point that we were talking about earlier. A good example, won't name names, but like introducing a new tokenization flow that potentially reduces overall latency at a large scale, but being able to introduce those sort of changes which have a very large impact with zero disruption to the end consumers of your API has been super critical across all four of the companies you just mentioned. I think like another call out really is around how the APIs I've worked with specifically have been designed to solve legitimate problems that sometimes get taken for granted. So I think I mentioned before, but typically payments or payment flows aren't something that get a massive amount of priority from anybody who's not in the payments space specifically. So it's pretty commonplace to start to see a number of challenges that businesses are facing that can potentially be addressed by uplifting some of their payments capabilities. So things like the ability to seamlessly integrate into third-party platforms, ERPs, CRMs, data warehouses, etc., right through to potentially like repurposing or reducing headcount as a result of automated payments and reconciliation processes that could have previously been handled by a manual process. When it comes to documentation, I think probably should have mentioned it earlier, but something that really grinds my gears is when it's when documentation isn't laid out in a logical flow or have some sort of intuitive navigation around it. So the best types of documentation, and Stripe is a great example of this, is when information is presented in a logical, easy to follow manner. Concepts are grouped together really well. Concepts and endpoints are grouped together really well. And you can quickly and easily find what you want to find without clicking on 6 different links and using 4 different search bars to get to the bottom of what you're trying to find. And I think similar to your point before, Trev, as well, one of the main things that, again, Stripe's a great example, but quite consistent across a number of other organizations, is the inclusion of developer tutorials or guides that help you get started really, really quickly without having to go in and digest every single piece of information within an API reference. So logical flow, intuitive navigation, tutorials and guides. I think that's my summation.
Love it. Gary, Steph, you have anything to add to that?
No, pretty good. That was a good explanation.
Yeah, 100%.
So, I mean, what we've got so far, right? So, like, if we take a step back and look at the topics we've discussed and what really kind of sticks out from an API perspective, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, right? So we were talking about performance, of course, security, of course. It was kind of like a modern standardization of the API, right? So that the expectations are well laid out and there's an improvement in compatibility between different APIs. Justin, I think you also kind of mentioned also just like if you can have a good API, also has like a bit of a thriving ecosystem of integrations and integration possibilities. That being a big one. Good documentation, clear documentation, and really not forgetting who you're targeting when it comes to both the API and the documentation. Anything either of you would add to that around, like, what the holy grail of an API experience looks like?
Selfishly, having a great, well-informed and knowledgeable solutions engineer who can step through documentation and API when that documentation or guides aren't clear. So the other thing I'd add.
Fantastic. And that actually reminds me that I also forgot to mention what Steph mentioned, is having, kind of a, if not instant, at least close to instant feedback loop, especially in the early stages of implementation. So, we've been talking about APIs a bit. It's been very kind of, somewhat high level, because we haven't been talking specifically about any particular API use cases, because, to be honest, nowadays in the world we live in, everything's ran by APIs, right? Everything's interconnected all the way to from the Internet of Things, and now you overlay AI and AI agents on top of that, and the next generation is going to be, I think it's going to blow everybody's mind. So with that in mind, I'll start with you, Gary. If you could build any API to solve a real-world problem, what would it be?
Yeah, but there's two of my bugbears that I'd like to get solved. One of them is a password vault for me that I own, that I can instantly engage with all the different apps. Everyone's got all these passwords in their heads. So having some sort of a biometric connection to me, that the app knows that it's me biometrically, but then can disperse an appropriate password for me to get access to the site that I'm trying to get into. I don't think anyone's doing that right now. If someone is, let me know, and I'll subscribe to that app straight away. But that's one that I would love to see in the complexity that we have, something that is interrelated to biometrics as well as security.
I like that. So kind of like using passkeys, the evolution of passkeys with biometric, but also associated to you as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
something
I like
that
it.
makes it indisputably me, and can't be faked or stolen.
Well, there's a shameless MasterCard plug here from from Con saying MasterCard passkeys. Thanks, Con. Thanks. What about you, Steph? Oh, we may have lost Steph again, so I might skip her for now and pass it over to you, Justin.
Yeah, cool. Like, probably got two as well. One, it's pretty boring being in the payment space, but one that's been around forever and doesn't seem to be going anywhere super fast is solving for lengthy FX and overseas transaction processing times. There's probably a number of different ways which people can start or have started to look at it, but don't think there's a succinct, proper, efficient way of doing it yet, which seems ridiculous in this day and age with all of the fantastic APIs we've been speaking about. On a more personal basis, shamelessly had a conversation with ChatGPT earlier to come up with an answer for this question. And I was going to say but we came up with the Spontaneous Fun Finder API, which helps me, because I struggle with this, finding spontaneous personalized activities or events based on current mood, location, and time constraints. So it would save my thumbs from Googling and
I actually like that a lot. That's great. You have a little gap in your calendar that you need to fill out based on, and you check your mood and automatically have some suggestions.
Exactly.
And Steph, have we got you back? We can hear some keyboard clacking. All right. Okay. Well, thanks, Steph. We'll skip on to, given the time and given that Steph is having some internet issues, we'll we'll skip to some closing questions, and if we have a little bit time left, we can take any questions that come up from anybody, or we might also have some time for a couple of extra topics. But going back to you, Gary, what's the best piece of non-work related advice you've ever received?
I guess the best advice I got was, if you can't control it or you can't change it, don't worry about it and don't get stressed by it. So it was, the ability to not take on baggage when it's not worth taking it on. So that's something that has resonated with me, and it's part of my behavior moving forward. If I can't control it or change it, don't let it worry you.
Perfect. Thanks, Gary. I like it. It's very much in line with the phrase "this too shall pass." If you've ever heard that before, I think one of the first times I heard it was like from Tom Hanks or something. That's one of his things. This too shall pass. Good times will pass. Bad times will pass. You just need to be present in all of them. Love it. No problem at all, Steph. No problem. What about you, Justin? I mean, I know I've given you personally a lot of non-work related advice. So what do you got?
Purposely not going to repeat any of that, Trev. Very early on in life, I was given some advice, which I can't really repeat word for word in this forum, but at a high level, it kind of aligns to the Nike tagline. So if you can imagine a more expletive way of phrasing "just do it," that'll give you a good idea of the best non-work related advice I've ever received. Although very much still applicable in a work environment as well, and something I tend to live by. If that gives you any idea.
Excellent. Thanks, Justin, for the very clear description of what that was, what that advice was. Well, in that case, I think we'll close out. Just a couple of shameless plugs. Here at Zepto, we're super thrilled to be the finalists in the 2024 Innovations Oz Awards program, and we've been shortlisted for that, our API, which we're happy to announce. And further, we're also in the running with Innovation Oz People Choice Award, and voting is open. And we'd love yours if you're a fan. No pressure, but we'd like to. I think Ben here will drop the link, or it'll be dropped in the chat. And if we could, get your vote, that'd be excellent. And before we go, I'll close it out in 60 seconds. If there's any other questions, or Steph, if you suddenly got better internet and you wanted to say something to the team, that'd be great. But otherwise, just having a quick look here. What do we got? I've got a little question here that we might just quickly address from Richard Watson. Wow, look, our back office team is quick, although there's a typo, so we'll let that one slide. But do you think developer roles change as APIs become more autonomous with the increased use of AI? Gary, do you want to take that?
Look, it's an ever-evolving platform. So AI is certainly more and more inclusive with what we're doing, and the roles will change. So we need to evolve with the new way of doing things. So AI is supposed to simplify what we're doing, which means that it allows us to work on things that are more valuable to us. So I don't see AI in this area as taking jobs or taking roles. It's allowing you to have more time to focus on what you're good at, and allowing the AI to do things that is repetitive and monotonous and not necessarily what you need to do. So for what it's worth, that was my comment.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks, Gary. And yeah, I tend to agree. I think that's a pretty deep conversation to have now, looking at how quickly that's progressing. But ultimately providing more flexibility and more time for creative thinking is, where it'll end up. And Justin, I'll give you a question. What are some challenges businesses tend to face when integrating modern APIs into their legacy systems? Question from Emily.
Again, there's probably a number of challenges they could face. I think the biggest one is. Sorry?
File processing?
Yes, exactly. Definitely up there. And it kind of relates to the overall point of, given that many legacy systems or platforms have existed for potentially decades, hence the name legacy, is that they're very interconnected between other platform services, processes across an entire organization. And so whilst it may seem potentially simple to implement an API or a microservice on top of here, there, and everywhere to provide a new payment method to end customers, that may have significant impacts down the line in terms of other processes, treasury management, for example. So it becomes more of a holistic approach to modernizing, or going through, I hate this word, but digital transformation, to ensure that you aren't just introducing a whole bunch of piecemeal services without any direct benefit to the overall operation of your business. Again, we could probably talk about this one for forever, but I know we're at time, so that's the high level.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Gary, anything to add to that before we close out and say thank you?
No, that all good there. APIs are a core component of our digital world now, so it's important to make sure we've got a good solution there that people can use.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for everybody for joining. And Steph, we really enjoyed your input earlier, and then your calming, quiet presence further on. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and till next time.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.